people, Jesus came with the perfect covenant, with a better agreement, with a better covenant for the people, right? Jesus brought a better, he brought a better covenant. We see that, Jesus overcame death, right? And he has life everlasting. Moses died, right? And as far as we know, he didn't come back, right? Jesus is constant. And he's a perfect mediator and advocate for us before God. Jesus is greater than Moses. I'm going to cover a couple of things here. And again, we're just going to build a foundation. Talking about Jesus, is he good at what he does? Does he do what he says he's going to do? As we move and look at Hebrews 5, it also, what we see is that Jesus was a role model for submission. That's an interesting thing. We read this and it says, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Now, this is an interesting thing. Jesus is unexpected. How many leaders are described by their reverent submission? Right? It talks about how Jesus, he said, he was heard because of his reverent submission. Not because he was powerful and he was, this intelligent person, or this, had a loud voice, or had a stature that made people take notice of him. It said because of his reverent submission, he was different. In many ways, you read this and you say, man, you started from reverent submission, and it says he ended up, right, designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. That's the true, the words, I don't know who's singing this, but when they talk about started at the bottom, now I'm here, right? When you start out, he didn't just start, he said, with in reverent submission, and then, man, he's above all, right? It says, designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Now, who is this Melchizedek? It references Jesus and says, man, in the order of Melchizedek. It doesn't say some other order. It says in a high priest. Now, we know that we're gonna look at Melchizedek. We know that about Aaron, right? And God set up the Levites as priests, right? The Levitical priesthood. He set up Aaron and Aaron's sons to be the high priest, and the Levites would accompany them and help them, whatever, to take care of the tabernacle and the temple, right? The high priest would go into the what they call the holy of holies, in terms of the place where it was behind a curtain, and it was only the high priest could go there, and it was only once a year, right? And it would go there and really engage with God on behalf of the people, right? They would atone for not only their own sins, but for the sins of the Israelites, right? And there was a shedding of blood. But who is Melchizedek? Let's look at it. Melchizedek was the first high priest. In Genesis 14, in verse 18, it says, then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. And he blessed Abram, saying, blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. This is a short verse, But it's incredible because Melchizedek was the first high priest. This was before God established the Levitical priesthood. There was no precedent. He obviously had a relationship with God. He obviously communicated with God. People didn't communicate with God like that. It said, basically, it said, blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. So it's saying, he's communicating to Abram really based on communication he had with God and communicating with Abram. Now, here's an aside here. You notice at the bottom it says, Abram gave a tenth of everything to Melchizedek. We talk about tithing, right? Right? We often, people will say, well, no, but tithing, that's part of the Old Testament. That was part of the Old Covenant. Part of the Mosaic Law, right? It was a part of the Mosaic Law. This is before the Mosaic Law came into being. Abram, who's Abraham, gave a tenth, he gave a tithe before the Mosaic Law came into being. It's an interesting thing to think about, the relevance of tithing. And, is it in fact just tied to the Mosaic Law, or is it greater than that? So again, we're looking at Melchizedek. Here we see Melchizedek is only referenced 3 times, really. 3 main scriptures in the Bible, and we just referenced one of them. The second one is in Psalms. And it says, now this psalm is really referencing Jesus. When it says, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind, you, he's talking about Jesus, are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Again, talking about Jesus in the context of Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek was a priest, but he wasn't a part of the Levitical priesthood. He wasn't a part of the line of Aaron. He was before that. He was unprecedented. As we look at it, we can compare what they call the Aaronic order versus the Melchizedek, right, order. The Aaronic order, which was Aaron, who God set up Aaron as the first high priest, whatever, in that order, and all of Aaron's sons were to become, take over that role based on birthright. And what did they do? They engaged God. They atoned for the sins of themselves and for the Israelites, right? But they could only do it while they were alive. They had a limited role because they were only in that role until they died. And they all did die. You compare that to Melchizedek. Melchizedek was pre the Mosaic Law. He was unprecedented. That role did not exist. He was never a part of the Aaronic line. His position was based on character, was based on power of an indestructible life, they say. In Hebrews 7, it talks about how there was no mention of Melchizedek's father or mother, or him having died. Wow. Some theologians suggest that Melchizedek is Jesus. But Melchizedek was clearly at a higher level and different from the Aaronic order of priests. Wow. And I'm going to tell you, we're going to look some more. I'm going to show you the next thing, okay? And the other thing is he's eternal. Again, this is just what they say, Melchizedek. We know that Jesus rose. He's eternal. And say the same thing about Melchizedek. When we look at Melchizedek, you break it down in the Hebrew as Melech, which means king, and Sadek, which is a verb to be just or righteous, Melchizedek was the king of peace and righteousness.
Wow.
His priesthood was not based on position, wasn't based on family birthright. It was based on righteousness and justice. Right? Sounds right, similar to Jesus. And it says in the Bible, he was the king of Salem. Salem is a form of shalom, which means peace. King of peace. Right? This is who the Bible references Jesus in the context of Melchizedek.
Wow.
Right?
Good stuff, Joe.
We look at Jesus. Jesus lived by faith. Look in Hebrews 12. It says, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Again, Jesus, I think about that, the pioneer and the perfecter of faith. Through his life, Jesus went through hard times. He said, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. How many of us are enduring our cross right now? We're enduring our own crosses, right? But Jesus, the perfecter and the author of our faith, we look to Jesus to understand how should I be as I'm undergoing my struggles and my obstacles and carrying my cross. We should look to Jesus. It said, scorning its shame. And then what happened? The result of Jesus' life, he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. We've got to look to God. We've got to look to Jesus as our example. And we know that, what do we see? We saw examples of Jesus. Remember, I read about in reverent submission. Who was he submissive to? He was submissive to God. We see his submission through his faith, through his prayer. Jesus cried out in prayer to God. Right? He didn't want to go through the things that he went through. But he had a mission, he had an objective, and he was determined. He persevered. You look at all these traits. These are things that we have to, have the same mindset as we're going through struggles, right? The thing about it is that, again, as we're following a leader, we want somebody who doesn't just preach it, but they're living it.
That's right.
Now, I've got to tell you that as I stand before you, I'm preaching to myself.
Yes.
Right? Because we don't want to be hypocritical. Come on, bro. Jesus was front line. I think about Dr. Martin Luther King coming across the bridge coming across the bridge, whatever, and you looking down, facing a crowd that means to do you harm. Billy clubs and horses and guns and dogs, and he wasn't in the back saying, I got your back, charge. He was like, let's go. I'm leading from the front. Man, that's a leader, right? I mean, that's just incredible. You think about that. You think about, if you're in the army or something and you're charging, you're going to try to take a position. It's like, man, to have a leader who's like, let's go. We're going to take this hill. We are going to take this hill. Not let y'all go, whatever, right? That instills confidence. Like, hey, if this guy can do it, if he's going to put his life on the line, then it gives me a little bit boost to say, hey, I'm going to do this too.